to make sure I click that record button right now. So we'll get that started. And then I'd like Mindy, if you would be kind enough to just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do. Then we'll bounce over to Melissa to do the same, and then we'll launch into questions. So
hi,
Mindy.
everybody. Can you hear me? Great. I'm Mindy Rowland. I'm the owner of Spark LLC. It's a one-person shop. It's me. I provide legal and HR consulting for both nonprofits and small businesses throughout the state of Wisconsin. I'm a lawyer by trade. Been practicing law for almost 20 years now, but I've been running Spark now for a little over 2 years. It's exciting and it's a very difficult time. I find myself trying to learn as much as I can about what's going on with the coronavirus and as it applies to the workforce and our workplace and our state, to be able to help and be a bit of a resource. So when Melanie suggested that we get something together, I thought this is a great idea. Let's just let people open it up, and if they've got questions, we can answer them. I'm also happy to get you on my mailing list that just kind of updates people as things come up. It's not fancy, but it gets the job done. And just keep everybody moving and as up to date as possible. I'm happy to talk about Ever's safer at home order that came out about an hour and a half ago, when the opportunity arises, as well as the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, some of the different things that are coming out with the legislature, hopefully today. So I'm happy to talk about all those things, but that also spans from, should I be laying my employees off? Should I be providing a furlough? How do I tell my employees about unemployment? What's the status on that? So any questions, that entire span, I'm happy to answer them. So please put your questions in the chat and I'll turn it over to Melissa.
Great, thanks Mindy. And Melanie, thank you for organizing this and having the foresight to think about the network and what could be helpful. Melissa Schultz with Schultz Nonprofit Law, 3 colleagues who help on the legal side, Jessica, Sarah, and Jeff, and another colleague, Melanie, who helps with our administration. Been doing this for 12 years and do the whole range from tax and business, corporate issues to real estate, finance, and employment, everything but intellectual property, pretty much. So given that breadth, I will not pretend to be an expert on everything that has come down related to the coronavirus response, but have read Governor Ever's order that just dropped this morning, and we'll weigh in where I can on that. So happy to answer all kinds of questions. Nothing scares me. I may not have an answer, but I could certainly follow up. So I am sure for those of you that have employees, the employment related issues are very top of mind. So I'm thinking maybe we should jump over to Mindy, and then I will jump in and or be here to follow up.
Perfect. Yeah, Mindy, I think if you could talk a bit about the order that just came out this morning, but also know that we're getting some questions. And I would offer up just one kind of seemingly super basic but connected. Can we actually go to the office to pick up checks and to write them?
Yeah, I saw that.
Are we homebound or can we venture out?
Yeah, and that is a good segue into the safer at home. We've been waiting. So Ever's, announced on Twitter yesterday, and everybody was kind of like, great, what are we talking about? And so just like I said, maybe an hour and a half ago, he came out with the actual order itself. So I have digested it as quickly as I could in preparation for this meeting, but the answer to that question is yes. So there are 2 categories generally of businesses. There's your essential functions and there's your non-essential functions. So even if you're considered a non-essential function, you can still keep your minimum operations open. And that is things like going to pick up checks, going to distribute checks. And it of course includes as often as possible and as much as possible employees being able to work remotely too. So generally speaking, what the order has done is tried to shut down everything that we don't absolutely need. But that said, there are a lot of exceptions. Childcare is open. All kinds of construction is open. Grocery stores, convenience stores, gas stations, all of it is open for business. Now, everybody's supposed to be practicing safe distancing, even at the essential functions. So that's the 6 feet apart. And then of course, for good measure, it throws in wash your hands for 20 seconds with warm water and soap. Gatherings of less than 10 people is still in effect, even if you're an essential function. So they are definitely trying to maintain that distance, even while allowing lots and lots of businesses to remain open. Maybe we should go to some specific questions.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'll continue to encourage, being and this is a bit of an aside, but being a words person, I think that there's the language that's been put out there in terms of, social distancing as being language that's been used for some time, to remember that it really is physical distancing and social connecting. And so just remembering and reminding ourselves that, yes, we are physically distancing ourselves, but those social connections remain really critical. And when we think about how we're doing and bringing that back to some of the questions that are in there, one's come up in terms of what's that specific effective date for the FFCRA sick leave, and how to deal with medical benefits who are taking voluntary furlough.
Sure. So I think I saw 2 questions about what the actual date of the FFCRA is. That is not a great acronym, but I'll just call it the ACT from now on. So if people remember, President Trump signed this in March 18, which seems like a month ago, but it was just last week. And it said within 15 days. And so people started doing the math and said, okay, this is either April 2nd or April 3rd, depending on, are we talking close of business? Lawyers like to be very specific with the deadlines, but the running number at this point, or the running date, appears to be April 2nd. Now it does say within 15 days, so it could have taken effect sooner than that. It just can't take effect later than that. But from everything I've seen, April 2nd is the go date. So the reason why we care about that, other than it's important to know the date, is the second quarter starts after the date goes into effect. So if you've got employees right now that you still are, that they're on your payroll, this act doesn't apply to anything going on until April 2nd. So people are getting a little bit up in arms and saying, I don't know how to do this. How does it work? You are going to have to figure it out in pretty short order, but it doesn't go into effect until next week. So we still have some time to figure it out. Questions about benefits. Let me just peek at this specifically. Continuing health insurance for staff. So different health insurance companies. So the question is how can we, or can we, is it possible or feasible for us to continue health insurance benefits even to our laid off staff? There are a couple of different things you can do. From a practical matter, keep in mind that if you keep your employees on through April 1 at least, you will have already paid, and if you're paying them, you will have paid for their health insurance for another month, because the health insurance premiums are usually paid on the 1st of the month. So they would get 30 days of extra health insurance covered. Other more creative solutions are to reach out to your health insurance organization. Some insurers are making exceptions and allowing employees to stay on even if they don't have those hours in. That does mean somebody's going to have to pay for it though. And that's either your employees or that's you. What is the most likely occurrence to a lot of people who are struggling right now is COBRA. And so what COBRA is I'm not going to try to reiterate what that acronym is, but what COBRA does is it allows your employees to stay on your health insurance on their dime for a period of time. That may be your best option as far as what to do. And it doesn't hurt to immediately give the employees the information and give your insurers the information about which employees you've laid off, so we can get that mechanism up and running, because that COBRA is in place for a reason. And unless you can afford to pay your employees health insurance, that probably is their only realistic option at this point. And I am happy to answer follow-up questions about that too, because that was pretty general.
Yeah, one of the things I know that has come up has been really with nonprofits, with staff, trying to figure out what are their options in terms of, would it be better to furlough, to use sabbatical, to ask them to cut back hours, sort of what are the options aside from termination, and or if they do have to go to a layoff termination perspective, then what should they be considering?
These are great questions. And I mean, the way that Melanie described it, those are all options available, right? You don't have to automatically assume we have to lay everybody off. I mean, I've got clients who are specifically decided we have no work, we have to shut down our doors. What we want to do is get our employees' unemployment numbers going. We want to get those applications running as soon as possible to get money into their hands. But then we also have clients who are saying, I can keep some of my people going. I can keep half of them going. I could reduce and say, we're going to work 50% of the time now. That way I can keep you at least on certain benefits, call it 30 hours a week if you need to in order to keep the health insurance going. So those are all different options available. I get a lot of questions about what's the difference between a furlough and a layoff. It's a little bit of a terminology game there, because for the employee's perspective, they don't have work and they're not getting paid. So, a furlough could be you take a day off a week, or you take 2 weeks off here, 2 weeks off there. But if you're communicating to your employees, we need to furlough you for the time being, you're essentially calling it's basically a layoff. For practical purposes, there's not a lot of difference there. And just remember that your employees, if you do furlough them or you do lay them off, they can go find work elsewhere. I have had clients who have provided bonuses to the employees as they were letting them go and said, look, we're going to give you this bonus. Please come back. Or we're going to give you this grant or this paycheck. We would like it to be a good faith, please come back when we're ready for you to come back. Something to incentivize them to come back when and if the time is ready.
Melissa,
Melanie, sorry.
I was just about to say, Melissa, was there something you'd like to add to that?
Well, just Mindy, I'm thinking there's some organizations that are overtaxed and have too much going on right now. And so what about like loaning out your employees and, perhaps getting reimbursed later, or, any comments on that?
The concept is interesting. The logistics of it is very difficult. When you take your employees and throw them into a different workplace, you have concerns about workers' comp claims, OSHA claims, there's safety issues involved, because if they're your employees, you're responsible for them, and then you throw them into a workplace that's you don't have any control over. So there are some concerns about that. You could fall into a pool of being considered a professional employer organization too, where you're providing benefits for an employee who really isn't yours. So I get a little nervous about that. I would feel more comfortable if you said, look, I don't have work for you right now. I'm going to lay you off. This person needs some work, so maybe you should go work for them on a temporary basis. I feel better about a hard cutoff personally. Now that said, if you got a sister nonprofit where you do a lot of work together, a little bit of here and a little bit of there doesn't concern me that much. But from a regulation, if somebody asked me that question in law school, I would say, no, do not do that. It's too risky.
How about people who want to volunteer or work, part-time, but end up working more hours because they care so much about the mission?
Yeah, those are, all of those considerations are the same considerations that we have whether what's going on right now is not going on, right? When you've got volunteers, you want to make sure that the lines are very clear. And if you've got part-time workers who are working more than they should, then we need to make sure that they're getting paid, because if their chances are they're hourly, you need to make sure they're getting paid everything that you're giving them, or set the parameters to keep that number down.
That you're complying with the fair labor, with the minimum wage.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And overtime for that matter. Yes.
But how about if it's a combination where they say certain hours are volunteer and then certain hours are paid, but if you add it all up, it exceeds the minimum wage?
I would make certain that if you had an employee who was also volunteering their time in addition to work for their time, that the kinds of things they were doing on their volunteer time was very much different than the kinds of things they were doing on their actual paid time, and that it was very much delineated. Maybe it's on Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm volunteering, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm getting paid. I would not let it commingle, because I think that's a recipe for disaster.
What do you think in terms of some of the things that the decisions organizations are needing to make right now? And this really applies not just to the employment related, but across the board in some cases, in terms of setting precedent for there's responses and actions that organizations are taking now because they need to in crisis. And when we're in non-crisis, the question has come up, what do we think in terms of any precedent setting, particularly from a legal perspective, and what that would look like?
From my perspective, I don't think it's time to be worried about setting a precedent right now. I think we need to take certain actions based on what's in front of us right now and be able to say, hey, everybody, that is what was happening back then. Things are a lot different now. I think we've got sadly the perfect example of an outlier event that's not going to be something that's going to tie our hands moving forward.
And it's one thing as we think about communicating to also make sure that you are providing that context in your communications with people that these are unprecedented times. We're reacting, we're moving nimbly, and making sure that while we don't know in terms of precedent from a legal perspective, that's one thing. From an impression or stakeholder management perspective, it's also another. And so with your employees, with your teams, your volunteers, continuing to reiterate that some of the actions that you might be taking that are outside of the norm or your standard practices, you are doing that in response to the situation that we're now facing, so that it gives you some flexibility and leeway to change as you need to adapt that, but also to be able, whenever this passes, to be able to go back and remind people we were taking those steps specifically in response to the coronavirus, the pandemic, the stay-at-home order, whatever those components are, and that you'll need to continue to provide that context to people. Once will not be enough. Sort of use that as some framing that you're doing at the beginning and the end, potentially, of all of your communications, just to keep that clear. One of the things that has come up, and Melissa, to turn this over to you, is can you speak a bit to some of the fundraising concerns? There's been a lot out there right now in terms of people raising funds for individuals or trying to do that because there are so many individuals who are being affected by this specifically. Any guidance or perspective that you would provide on that front?
Sure. Again, these rules haven't changed, but generally, the IRS actually has pretty good resources on what I would refer to broadly as disaster relief. There's a little more flexibility in disaster relief situations about serving individuals, and you still have to serve a charitable class, but sometimes the charitable class is people who otherwise have resources but can't access them for some reason, or just have an immediate need for shelter or for an alternative place to stay, and so that's one set of issues to know, is you do have some flexibility. But if you are going to try to provide support to individuals, the requirement is that it's for an indefinite class. So it can't be, for example, only your employees in response to COVID-19. It could be, you could set up an employee relief fund, but it needs to be for future disasters as well and other like emergency medical needs. So little bit of, wordsmithing there perhaps. Same thing, like when, we get a lot of questions about people wanting to help like one family in the community around with their medical needs or medical expenses. And you can end up supporting only one family, but your fundraising efforts and how you present it to the community needs to be broader than that. It needs to be people who are in crisis because of health-related expenses. You can make it a little narrower than that, and it obviously doesn't have to be everyone that applies gets the funding, but you do need to fundraise with a little bit of a generic purpose there. So I see we have a lot more questions for Mindy too. So
and before we jump back onto the HR, I want to just do something on the development fundraising side. One of the questions that has come up in a lot of different forums is also, should we still be asking for money? And should we be doing fundraising? Should we have stopped everything? And in looking around, I would encourage everyone, when you ask that question, it really goes back to, know your audience and know your purpose. So let your ideology and your needs guide you.
Particularly since Governor Evers, the order says that essential functions are human service operations. And, that's long-term care, assisted living, shelters, domestic abuse, people with serving people with disabilities, substance abuse, mental illness, physical, intellectual developmental disabilities, food, cash assistance, food pantries. It's a wide range still of what's essential services. And so I think, to Melanie's point, know your audience, but I think there is great need on certain fronts.
Absolutely. And I think there's also, great need on those non-essential fronts too, where we're also seeing a lot of activity and a lot of nonprofits who are now really facing different and tougher decisions about their ability to sustain moving forward. So just to remember that, in these times, don't be tone deaf, to know like what is happening in your community and with your donors, get a sense for where they are, don't make assumptions, and reach out with context. So find ways that you can also demonstrate your relevance in these times and beyond, and know that sometimes right now what you might be asking for is direct financial support. You might also be building a case of relevance for how you were able to help or support others during these really turbulent times that can be useful coming back. So I wanted to just bring that in. And
Melanie, actually, I guess, can I say one more thing about that?
Yeah.
Because we do get this question is, you can also be dormant. I know one of the participants here, says they're out of funding, they're all volunteers. Right now, they probably, for all intents and purposes, shut down. And that's okay. There's no, unlike, some private foundations where they have to distribute a certain amount every year, you can be on hiatus. You still have to do your basic filings, which would be, for last year will be the one due May 15th, unless that gets extended. You want to maintain kind of the corporate entity, do your basic annual report. But, you can pause and hold the money you have, and then, decide what to do.
That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that out. Mindy, if we could go back to you, one of the questions that I think has come up a couple of times in the chat has been this question about being able to collect from multiple pools. So can someone be collecting unemployment while also collecting information through the Act? Kind of how does the money work on this? Oh, hold on. I think we have to unmute you. I'm not, or you have to unmute you. There we go.
I muted myself by accident because I was trying to answer some of the questions in the chat while we were going, in case we didn't get to them. So I will say, I think I know the answer, but I can't be certain on some of these questions. So I'll do the best that I can. In Wisconsin, you can apply for unemployment. You don't have to lose all of your job. You can lose a certain amount and be able to apply for unemployment for the difference. So there are situations where if you tell your employees you're on a 30% plan, right? You're only gonna be working 30% of the time. They can still go and apply for unemployment. How that interplays with the FFCRA, I don't know exactly. I do know that if your employee is laid off 100%, right now the advice and counsel that we're getting is if your employee is no longer an employee, they don't get the paid leave time or the paid family leave because they're not an employee of yours anymore. You're not paying them anything. That makes sense in that the way that the reimbursement structure is set up through the FFCRA is that when you pay the employees, normally you withhold certain money, right? You withhold their Social Security and different things, rather than keeping that money and distributing it back to the federal government on either a quarterly or a monthly basis. Instead, what you do is you just keep the money, or whatever the amount of money is that you would have paid the employee. Well, if you're not paying the employee any money because they're no longer employed by you, it wouldn't make sense that you would still be providing paid leave. So that's kind of the counsel that people have been throwing out there for now. I don't know. What I will say though is this interplay between if you still have a job but you've lost 50% of it, can you still apply for your paid leave on a prorated response and then also apply for unemployment. I don't know how that interplay is going to work. And frankly, I'm not sure the people that put this act into place were thinking about some of the nuance. If you can remember, it got shoved through very quickly. So I think some of that we're going to have to play out. For what it's worth, if it were me and I had employees who I said, I can only pay you 50%, you should go apply for unemployment, I would still provide them that credit, because it's not costing you any money. I mean, you do have to get reimbursed, but it's 100% reimbursable for whatever you pay the employee. Keep in mind, there are maximums. I don't suggest that you pay your employee more than the max provided to be reimbursed, because that is going to be out of your own pocket. But if you pay the max, that is a way that may be able to bump their income a little bit in the short term.
Melanie, I have another favorite topic I like to talk about. With being the bearer of bad news, my job is to think of worst case scenarios as a lawyer. If your organization continues to struggle financially and you get to the point where ends are not meeting, do not keep paying your employees, keep providing service, and forego paying your employment taxes. I cannot tell you the heartbreaking stories that we have had to deal with in our practice over the last decade of, basically the people who loved too much, that kept serving, and I'm not trying to be flip about it, but they wanted to keep their employees on because they knew that they were relying on the support, et cetera. But in the process, the IRS, they did not pay the portion that they had withheld from the paychecks to the IRS, either the employer portion or the amount withheld from the employee. And the IRS considers that stealing, and it is the one situation where they will go after the board of directors personally, and they will go after the executive director, any staff that had control in that situation, and you will be held personally liable. And trust me, it is bad and ruthless, and it's like it's a joint liability, so they'll go after everyone together, and then you have to try to get yourself out of it. So it is really difficult, but stay out ahead of those employment taxes at all. And usually it's I think some of it happens by mistake, where people think they have the money in the bank. Maybe they lay off the bookkeeper. They don't understand that money in the bank was actually to get paid with their quarterly tax payment, and then they spent it. So tell us something more encouraging, Mindy.
I would agree with Melissa. It is, I mean, you're not going to not have to pay that money back. That's the thing, is that once you're in the hole, you're going to have to go in and pay that money back. And as much as we want to keep everybody on the payroll, if you can't do it, you can't do it. Now, somebody asked a question up a little ways, and I think this kind of ties into that, if that's okay. The idea here is, and the question is, there's the third package is coming out, right? That we're hoping it's going to get passed today. This, I don't know, is it $1.5 trillion or $2.5 trillion that's in the Senate right now, and we're hoping it's going to move from the Senate to the House and get passed. One of the things in there is a very large sum for small businesses and nonprofits in order to provide loans that might eventually turn into grants, or grants that might turn into loans. And one of the questions was, should we try to hold off and see? If we can hang in there for a couple more weeks, should we hold off and see? I think that's a business by business decision. It's an organization based decision. If you can keep it going, and pay your payroll, even if it's at a reduced rate, for example, or something, and keep it on, that may be an option. But if you're at the bottom of the barrel, hanging on is not going to do it. And maybe you can bring some of those employees back when those grants come to fruition. There's so much devil in the details with some of these things that I'd hate to give the advice and say, look, if you can hold off, the government's going to fix you small business or fix you organization, and you're going to be able to run your payroll. So hold on. And then all of a sudden there's some you know, something in the fine print that doesn't apply to your organization. So I would be, I'm hesitant to say that, especially when you could bring your employees back, if and when that's an option available. But especially with the safer at home order, at least for the state of Wisconsin, that's come into place, I think you have to factor all of that in together, and that people aren't going to be out. And what does that mean for your organization? Just from a, you know, are people going to be freaking out? Will they have income coming in? You know, maybe you can withstand it, but can the people that you need, are they out there to help you as well? Sorry if that was a little jumbly, but that's the concept I've got.
Well, and I think it really goes back to also, in many respects, they're turbulent times, and they're certainly introducing change, but really what they are revealing is the value and the need for strategy and planning. And that a lot of what's out there is they're not new things. It's just, this is on a magnitude that we haven't experienced before, and in ways that are really disrupting a variety of our norms. But the opportunity that everyone also has right now is to rely on your ideology, you know, lead with your values. What are they guiding you in terms of the behavioral expectations to set your practices, to frame your messages? You know, support everything with your mission. What is your purpose? What is your core? And remember to inspire people with the vision, what you're in there to do. And then to look to those strategic plans, to look to those operational plans, hopefully you have them, and not throw them out, but rather pull them forward and say, how is this going to help guide us through this challenge? And to be able to look then at scenario planning so that you can go, all right, if we anticipate we have lost 80% of our potential revenue or fundraised income this year, what does that mean for what we are able to do in terms of our obligations, in terms of our opportunities, as opposed to what does this mean if you've actually increased your revenues, because there will be some nonprofits who will have that opportunity to increase their revenues during this time and to do that responsibly and meeting the needs, because there's so much need being put forward right now and so much opportunity. You still have to operate within your means. And so that scenario planning and looking ahead can help you figure that out. The other thing, you know, Melissa, you mentioned, you know, being that voice of coming in and what's the worst case scenario. Often I'm that voice that's reminding people out of these unfortunate times and tension, it can give you the excuse or the release to make some of those tough decisions you've been not making. So for some organizations, you know, this is a time where perhaps you have been contemplating, do we need to have this part-time person or this other person? And you'd already been asking those questions. This is a different lever that now you may be able to pull upon to say, you know, we can't sustain that. And that is a very unpopular way to look at this sort of thing, but it is also a business reality of being able to use this to look at what resources do you have, what's essential for your organization to do, and to make sure that if you are one of those organizations that's ballooning up to handle the crises and to provide more and more services, when this passes, how are you then prepared to come back down, as opposed to having elevated your services and spiked them and then having this expectation that you're now going to continue that level of service moving forward. So really having some of that opportunity to do that scenario planning, pull out your strategies and just stay true to what you are intending. And for other organizations, it may be pulling that out and realizing we have to do a complete pivot. That this new normal has only surfaced the fact that our business model, being even in a nonprofit, there's a business model, our point in that is it's not sustainable. And so how can we change? How can we adapt to everything that we're now seeing out there? So there are opportunities within this as well. But it is that time to really reveal what is your strategy, what's your core, and how can you keep moving that forward.
I would like to address, we've got a couple of questions. I've been trying to go up and make sure we're covering them all. And there's a couple of questions about, you know, one of the comments was, I've got work right now for now, but my employees are trying to figure out, should I furlough them or lay them off so they can apply for unemployment, or should I keep them on and then pay the paid sick leave when it comes out? So to respond to that question, it is math. And so there is a website that I can forward if anybody wants it, where you can actually do a calculator. Here's how much money I make. Here's how long I've worked. Here's how much unemployment I would get as a result. And if that number is larger than the $511 or the $200 based on which category that you're in, it may be better for you to lay employees off and let them get that unemployment. Or it may be that it's not better. So it really is just, it's just doing math. You know how much money your employees can get through the paid sick leave because there is a max. And then the other, but then if you go to the UI website, and I'm going to answer the next question too that I think Tara had also said is, if I lay my employees off 50% or I only pay them 50%, the idea there is reduction in hours. Okay, so if I used to work 40 hours a week, but I only work 20 hours a week and I'm getting paid commensurate with that, so 50% less, there is another link that I can send you where it says, okay, if I was 100% unemployed, I would get this much. At 50% unemployed, which is kind of the way to look at it, I would make this much. And you can look at that number too and get a handle on that. For some people, it will be zero. You may not make enough money in order for that reduction to be anything. But for some people, even at a partial loss, like a 50% loss, you will still get a smaller amount of unemployment. It will not be the same. And it's not like it's going to be half. It's a different calculation. And math is not, I can't do the math, but there is a website out there for UW or for Wisconsin unemployment insurance. It has it exactly there. So that should provide, and I'm happy to send the link out to whoever wants it.
And what we'll do is also compile some resources that between the three of us, and we'll send that out to everyone who's registered. So that, I know there have been a number of questions about web links and things like that. We'll also include some additional resources. And so if you know of those that are out there, feel free to email that to me or to send me a chat privately, and I'll include those things. For instance, like nplace.org is another resource that's available and has a specific questions and answers where some of these types of things are also being discussed among nonprofit colleagues. So we'll look to collect some of those and send them out after the conference today.
Yeah, and Melanie, we're trying to send out updates if people want to get on our list. My email address will be available, and we can add you. I like one of these questions here. I don't suppose anyone knows of any assistance or reimbursement for people who make 100% of their income as independent contractors, freelancers. That is a really difficult one. Mindy, you have any magic, but it certainly speaks to this issue of.
I have an answer.
Classification, go.
I have an answer. Under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, it specifically refers to contractors and gig. I love this phrase. I didn't know it was a term of art until now. Gig workers, people who are contract workers, and there is a provision in the FFCRA that provides for the same amount of reimbursement. Again, it's maxed out, so it's not however much you're making, but the same provisions that are in that apply to your employees also apply to independent contractors or freelancers. So the reimbursement mechanism is a little bit different because as a former independent contractor myself, now I'm on my own employee, but before as an independent contractor, you pay your taxes differently, right? So the reimbursement mechanism is a little bit different, but there is a provision in place for it. So it's like a lot of things at the FFCRA, it's not completely clear, but it is clear that there is a mechanism in place.
Oh, that's fantastic. I actually,
I was very happy to hear that.
Yeah. Really happy to hear that. You know, this just belies this challenge that, you know, a can go by where we don't have, or maybe a day doesn't go by where we don't have a conversation with our nonprofit clients about how they classify their employees. And, you know, so many people think, oh, we'll just have them be contractors. And in fact, they shouldn't be. I mean, both legally, but there's also real ethical issues about, you know, what kind of resources people have access to in that situation. Melanie, one other quick thing I want to comment on that relates to all this. Again, hesitate to say this, but if you feel like it is a cash flow issue and that it's a matter of reimbursement and that you're providing certain services. Just want to put out there that it is okay for nonprofits to get loans. They can get loans from individuals. They can get loans from someone on their board. I beg you to document it. It doesn't have to be complicated. A one page where it's clear what the expectation is. You don't have to have payments along the way. It could balloon at a certain time. And then of course those loans could always turn into gifts if they're not able to be paid back. And of course anyone making the loan should know that there's a very good chance that it might not be paid back. And please, please, please don't accept loans from like your employees who are taking it out of their retirement funds, which I've also seen. But just want to put out there that basic concept that, loans are a permissible tool for managing cash flow.
They are, and also to remember that they do have to be paid back or accounted for so that it can be, again, a temporary fix to a long-term need. So keeping that focus on the immediate, but also on the long-term is super important. There are also two kind of really specific questions that I think might be helpful. One that came up is, are nonprofits with fewer than 50 employees likely to be exempt from the Act?
So the answer to that is no. They're not exempt. They can get an exception. So the Act has two components. It's got paid sick leave that gives you 10 days real quick, okay? And then it's got the paid family medical leave, which is just if you have to take care of your kids because they're off school or because your childcare is closed. So that's the 10 weeks that's also paid. So there is no exemption for people with fewer than 50 employees under the paid sick leave. Under the paid family leave, so that's the 10 weeks, that's the big dog. There is an exemption for employers with fewer than 50 employees. If it's going to be too hard for you, you can apply for an exemption. You're not automatically exempt, but you can apply for the exemption under that bigger 10-week chunk.
And then another question that has come up, and before that question, I just want to do a quick shout out to El Nisa with Collaboration for Good. Thank you for popping all of these web links into the chat with particularly related to freelancers and others of information that's out there. Thank you, and everyone can keep doing that. Another question that came up earlier in the chat function was this question about the doctor's note, and you answered it, Mindy, that it is not required. And then the question is, well, if it isn't legally required, can an employer still require said doctor's note or other sort of proof?
Yeah, okay, so again, keep in mind that under the FFCRA, there are two buckets of leave that an employee is entitled to, okay? One is the paid sick leave, and there's two categories of that. There's, I'm sick, I know I have the coronavirus, I'm sick, I think I have the coronavirus, I'm sick and I've been told to stay home because I might have the coronavirus, right? So there's that. And then there's the, I have to take care of other people. That includes my kid's school is closed, okay? So under the first bucket, the paid sick leave, where you get the 2 weeks, where an employee would get the 2 weeks paid, all they have to do is say, my school's closed. My kid's school is closed, my childcare is closed. We all know the schools are closed. So that seems, yes, sure. But they can just grab another bucket, if you will. If they say, I'm sick, I think I might have the coronavirus, frankly, you've got a lot more to be concerned about than whether or not they got a doctor's note. You need to make sure that you're finding out what other employees they came into contact with, what clients, what vendors, whether or not you need to get the place cleaned. You've got all those things to be concerned about. So sure, you could ask for a doctor's note. Right now, at least in the state of Wisconsin, we're being told not to go to the doctor if you are exhibiting some symptoms. So getting a doctor's note may not be feasible. And again, if I'm the employee, and I'm just gonna be pretty blunt here, I would say, fine, then I can't work because my kid's home. And then you still have to provide the money, okay? So in the second category, so that's the paid family leave. That, as a compromise between Republicans and Democrats, minimized when you get the 10 weeks paid family leave. That is only because your kids are home or because of childcare. You can still take FMLA leave, but it's going to be unpaid if you're sick or if you're taking care of a spouse or a kid who's sick. The only time you get the money from the employer vis-a-vis the government is if your kid is home from school or can't work, you can't send your kid to a childcare provider. So again, that's not going to require a note. We all know the schools are closed. Maybe you want a note from the childcare provider, but those are the only circumstances. So the note question is good. I don't think it's going to be that applicable when it comes to the FFCRA.
I think one of the other, and this may not have been behind the question that was posed, but I think one of the other challenges that a lot of organizations are facing right now might be related to a question about asking for a note, which is now we have an entire workforce distributed all, and I'm air quoting here for those who can't see me, working from home. And so sometimes that questions about what should we be asking for has a lot more to do with accountability for productivity and trying to figure out, okay, when are people working, when are they not working? And so one of the other things I would encourage you to do if you're thinking about what am I asking my employees to document or share with me is why you're asking that and what you need from that. And not that it may not be important or critical for moving your organization forward, but also knowing that this might be the time when compassionate accountability comes into play and you can relax a little bit. And if your employees are trying to find their feet and work through this whole working from home business or working virtually, to give them some space and grace to do that and to check in with them routinely. To check in with people and ask them how they're doing, what do they need in order to make this a smooth transition. And if they aren't performing in the things that you're needing them to do, have a conversation with them about it and move that forward. So just wanted to put that in because I think that's another challenge, unexpected challenge that a lot of people are trying to figure out right now. And we've had some additional questions. Just did a pause and look back at the chat to see what else is coming in and looking at a lot of questions about, again, that Mindy's been answering in there. Anything else as we come down to our final official 4 minutes of our lunch time, which I was also delighted to see some of you actually nourishing yourselves during this time. Thank you for doing that. Anything that, Mindy, you'd like to highlight and add, and then Melissa, the same to you.
I will only say that I put together kind of a cheat sheet of the FFCRA that I sent out to some of the people on this link, but not everybody because people came in from different sources. I'm happy to also send that out too. Somebody asked the link about the hardship, whether the exemption is for 50 employees or for 25 employees. The 25 employee exemption actually relates to having to bring people back after the fact. The 50 is to try to not have to pay for the leave at all in the first instance. But the bullet point cheat sheet, if you will, has got all that information on it. So we'll make sure we send it out, and hopefully that'll help some of these questions. And again, I'm always happy to field questions after this too.
Melissa, anything you'd highlight?
No, I just want to thank everyone out there. I mean, I know these are really difficult times for everyone personally, and I know that people are trying to do their part to help, you know, the immediate needs in the community, but also think about the future of their organization, which, you know, there will come a time when everyone's organization, you know, remains important, but just grateful for the amazing responses I'm seeing every day from all of you.